You're listening to Tonebender's Sound Design Podcast, presented by Sound Ideas. This is the show where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, games, and series. Sound Ideas works with partners across the creative industries to distribute professional sound libraries, and they're always looking to grow their collection. If you've created your own sound effects library or are currently developing one, Sound Ideas is interested in acquiring high-quality collections from creators, whether it's a focus collection or a wide-ranging release. They offer a trusted platform with global distribution, professional licensing, metadata support, and a team that understands the craft. If you have a sound effects library and are interested in selling it, Sound Ideas would like to hear from you. To get more information, please reach out via email to support@sound-ideas.com. Hello everyone, my name is Tim Muirhead and I will be re-podcasting one of my all-time favorite interviews that Tonebenders has ever done. This talk with Johnnie Byrne about his work on director Jordan Peele's film Nope is an episode that I want everyone to hear. So if you are a new listener to Tonebenders, you're in luck today, because if you missed this one the first time, you're going to love it now. If you did hear it the first time around, it totally stands up to repeat listens, so stay tuned. Johnnie was so kind as to provide me with a bunch of clips of work in progress and original recordings to help illustrate his recollections of how the sound for this great film came to life. So stay tuned for this interview, it's really great. The reason that I'm replaying this interview now is that Johnnie also worked on another film that I think you should check out that's in theaters right now. It's called Tuner. This is an excellent heist film with a plot that revolves around sound, in particularly how the main character perceives the sounds around him, making the sound design for the film an extremely important part of making the film work for audiences. I got to see Tuner at the Toronto International Film Festival last September, and I really loved it. Then, in December that just went by, Johnnie and I did an interview mostly focused on his work on Hamnet and Begonia. At the end of that interview, I asked him a few questions about Tuner, but at that point, no one had seen it yet. So we're going to start this episode with a few minutes of Johnnie and I talking about the film Tuner, which will be followed by the full-length Nope interview between Johnnie, myself, and guest co-host Mark Kilborn. In addition to being a great storyteller and extremely talented sound person, Johnnie is also a big supporter of Tonebenders and has always been really helpful to both me and the podcast. So that makes me an even bigger fan of him in general. So let's hear from him now. First, from last December about the film Tuner, which is in theaters now, and then our full-length talk about Nope. Here we go. Just quickly, no one will have seen Tuner that's listening to this yet, but the idea of that movie is that it's a main character who has an affliction that lets him have hyper-acute hearing, and he's kind of drafted into the mob to pick safes because he can hear.
That's right.
The idea of representing hyper-acute hearing on screen, how did you first approach that, and how did that evolve?
Daniel Rohrer, fantastic director. Tuner is such a brilliant movie. Dustin Hoffman is a piano tuner, and he hires a young apprentice, Leo Woodall, to help him. And Leo Woodall has this hearing issue. And when Daniel sent me the script, I called him up. I was like, holy shit, I know exactly what this feels like, because I've actually had this. When I was 17, I took a plastic water bottle and I wedged it under a tap, and the tap was on full blast, and I went out for a run and I forgot about it completely, and I came back like an hour later and the water was only halfway up the bottle, and I thought, that's weird, A, that I forgot it, but B, if I forgot it, I know I would have left the tap on, so why is it only half full? But anyway, it was like a seal, and when I touched the bottle, it was under so much pressure from London Ring Main water that it exploded in my face, and I was covered in bits of plastic, and a couple of seconds later I realised I was 100% deaf. I was profoundly could not hear a sausage. And at 17, I was like, oh my God, I've killed my hearing. I'm never going to hear me. Which is actually the thing that made me decide to quit university and go and be a sound engineer, because I realised I like sound. But my hearing came back after 20 minutes. But I'd spent 10 minutes standing in front of my hi-fi system playing Rock the Bells, LL Cool J, and feeling the speakers move, but not hearing anything, and thinking, Jesus Christ, I'm deaf. And then when my hearing came back, for a good many months afterwards, I had hyperacusis, which is, sounds are like an allergy, you just, So Tuner is a movie where we have this wonderful young man, Leo Woodall's character, who has to wear earplugs when he's going around daily life to keep the ambient noise down. When he's out in the street, he, on top of that, he puts ear defenders, big old cuff things, to really block out motorbikes and people shouting. And occasionally he has neither of these things on if he's at home and in his safe environment. Through all that, they work out as a piano tuner, which is his job. So it's wonderful, all the aspects of how the sound works in that. But they also work out he can also do things like hear how safes get open because he can hear when the pin drops because his hearing is so sensitive. So Tuner is a movie that has many different perspectives of sound from the same character. You know, when he's doing his job tuning a piano and when he's being attacked by sound. And so, yeah, it's a wonderful, glorious Dolby Atmos demonstration of what it's like to have this terrible affliction. And I hope, you know, it resonates with people who suffer from this, although maybe there should be a special screening held at 30 dB or something.
It's a really fun movie that would be interesting to sound people for that, but beyond that, it's a really great twist on a heist film. Like, it's just a fun movie. I really enjoyed watching it. My name is Tim Muirhead, and I will be your host for today, and my co-host will be Mark Kilborn. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I am excellent because we are here to talk about the amazing sound work in the latest film from director Jordan Peele called Nope. This film has a lot going on, but it centers around a brother and sister who live on a remote horse farm somewhere on the outskirts of Hollywood. Strange things are happening, and they are compelled to try and untangle the mystery. From a sound perspective, a huge amount of the plot is revealed through off-screen sound design. And then when things start happening on screen, the sound continues to carry a heavy workload, deliver the menace and at times beauty of our film's hunter. There will be major spoilers coming, so proceed with caution. Joining us today for our talk will be the film's re-recording mixer, sound designer, and supervising sound editor, Johnnie Byrne. Welcome to Tonebenders, Johnnie. It's great to meet you.
Tim, hi. Great to be here.
Awesome. Okay, before we start talking about Nope, I would like to put a little wind in the sails of Johnnie. There are lots of sound pros out there that are great at coming up with interesting sounds that blow us away in big dramatic scenes. But there are way fewer people out there that are able to create a mood, develop a vibe through sound design in the smaller moments that normally we tend to give off to the score to control the reins. In the 90s, Skip Livesay was one of my favorites in this regard. In those early Coen brother films, they were so great. Another one is Paul Davies. Eileen Lee in First Man did an amazing job at this. But when I first saw Under the Skin, I knew Johnnie was another name to add to this list. I'm always excited when a new film comes out with Johnnie on board because I know the sound design is going to create a texture I am not expecting, and the mood is going to be a character in the film as much as any actor. So Johnnie, I guess my first question is, how do you go about finding a thread to start building what I'm calling here the film's vibe, its mood?
Yeah, what I try and do is to just work out how to best convey the mood of a scene by using whatever diegetic sound you can. And to make the choices about that to be the ones that will most convey an emotion. And I guess part of that is, as much as possible, making things lean towards a musicality of some sort.
In this film, I think that maybe one of the things you leaned on for that kind of thing was wind. There's all sorts of winds going on here. Were you out in the field recording winds? Where'd you come up with some of the winds, the really evocative ones in this film?
Yeah, it's funny that, because when I first started talking with Jordan about the project, the first thing we were discussing was how actually the whole thing with Jean Jacket and the entity would be that we were hearing it more just by the way it was disturbing the environment and how the kind of the winds would change when it was nearby. Through doing that, I've got a recording of couple of winds from various projects, as most people like us do. But I then realized that actually what I needed was kind of gusts of wind rather than, here's a strong constant wind or whatever. Fortunately, I live by the seaside, which is a windy place with a hill behind it. So I spent an awful lot of time checking the weather and going up to the top of the hill, just behind my house. And yeah, I record wind all the time if I'm on holiday, I'm that guy with the microphone in the family holiday luggage. One of the first things I did was play Jordan through, hundreds of different winds, and he was tired by the end of it. I'm glad you made me hear all of those, Johnnie. That's really good. But we did get to a point where actually we found some interesting ones, and then from there it was about the process of shaping those winds and taking the kind of the white noise that is a wind, the blank canvas of full spectrum sound, and trying to coax out the pieces of that start to become more mood-based.
The enemy, the hunter in this film, is a very odd creature. It doesn't have an obvious voice to it. And I'm curious where you found inspiration for that. You know, you look at it and my reaction was like, what would this thing even sound like if I were working on this? It doesn't have an obvious mouth. It doesn't seem to like say anything up front. So how did you find the sound? Like, what experiments did you go through? How did you get there?
So in this movie, we hear the monster a few different ways. In the beginning of the film, we're hearing the kind of disturbance of the environment as it moves around and how the winds change. And then later on, we realize that the kind of whistle of the wind that we thought we were hearing is actually more likely the screams of people trapped inside. So one of the main ways we're hearing it is from the victims trapped inside. And then about halfway through the movie, we start to hear Jean Jacket the monster in a new way. And that's because the monster's got a bit pissed off and has come to seek revenge. And now that's where we had to introduce a voice and some form of personification into the ingredients. And so for that, we were very specifically trying to find a way of being able to express the animal's state, but without giving away too much that it's not necessarily an animal. You know, at that point in the film, we were still understanding that perhaps we're here to watch an alien spaceship movie, not here's an animal. So for the kind of scenes mid-film where we're hearing Jean Jacket screaming at Dupe, that sound is part synthesizer, part peacock, part human growl, part kazoo, but a kind of a careful blend in order to try and not give away too much about, you know, the origin of the species or anything. And then later on in the film, we're hearing the monster suddenly change into this enormous winged beast, and that's when it's in kind of full look at me mode. But all of those sounds actually had an origin from the original start point of wind, and looking at how you could coax musical frequencies and pitch out of a single piece of wind, and you could then shape that wind to either become the same kind of cadence as a human scream. And so you could hear a human scream and then straight after hear the kind of tail out of that, mimicking it in wind, as if the monster was maybe trying to do the thing where you sort of cough if you farted to kind of hide what just happened. And then we go on to the point of using the same winds, but having them sound more beautiful through a kind of harmonic pitch. The main thing we were trying to do was create something that sounded organic, but didn't give away the idea that it was necessarily animal, could still be scientific.
And did the director, did he have ideas in his head about what this would sound like, or did he kind of leave you to your own devices?
Well, so I came on about 6 months before the shoot. So the first conversation I had with Jordan was, hey, I've got this great script that I'm writing, and he sent it to me, and I was amazed by how much it described sound. And then I kind of chipped in and had some ideas, and the script was rewritten a few times more with, you know, basing a bit more solidly about certain sound ideas. So yeah, after my first script read, I sent Jordan 10 little WAV files that were, here's how I imagine it 10 feet away, and here's how we'd hear it if it's half a mile away. So we built up this library of different ideas for the kind of wrong winds, was how Jordan would call it. He said, I want to hear it like natural, but just sort of slightly wrong. And then he'd kind of leave it up to me to create some way of having a personality come through the shape of a bit of wind, for example.
So something that I'm really curious about is you wore 3 distinct hats on this film.
Uh-huh.
So you were the sound designer, supervising sound editor, and re-recording mixer. And in general, for a film this size, in the credits, the sound team is quite small. Yeah.
And boy, did I regret it in the last couple of months when I had so much to do.
Well, that might be where my question is leading. But how do you even get like a major movie studio? Because like obviously a smaller sound team can't crunch through the amount of stuff in the same amount of time as, 10 or 15 people working on it. Like a big Hollywood movie studio, they want their movie out in theaters, I'm assuming, as fast as possible. How do you convince the director, the producers to have the trust in you to be a smaller team, but that they'll get a better product in the end?
So there is a fair bit about my workflow that's different and does support a kind of a smaller team. I mean, I can outline in briefly, but basically there were two things that kind of played to the favour of wearing three hats. Number one, I was on the project for a year and a half, and we did a whole pass of the film before the film was even shot. So I worked on the script, and we had pre-visualisation, and where the pre-visualisation didn't work or didn't exist, I actually just sort of did a screenshot of the script and would scroll that. So I had a whole 2-hour-long movie with all the sound design all worked out, and all the different ideas and different permutations, enormous library of sound design alternatives. So I figured when we get to the post-production stage, I probably would be all right, and because we knew where we were going with sound design, so I wouldn't need to wear that hat too much. And the supervising sound editor bit was, is in big Hollywood movies, a lot of that is administrative and is all the kind of the stuff you have to do when you're not mixing. So yes, it became extremely complicated in the final 6 weeks when the execs from Universal would come in and say, how's the movie going? And I'd be like, it's great, and come and have a listen. And it was definitely sounding great, but there was, every night I'd have a couple of hours work to do that would be admin after mixing. So I wouldn't do that again. But the other thing that's really plays to the favour of wearing three hats is that I don't work in Pro Tools, I work in Nuendo, because I find it a better creative tool, and it allows me to bring together, 2,000 tracks of a mix very easily and be able to sculpt a mix from beginning to end. So whereas most people would need to wait to the mix stage to start bringing all the units together and the different machines and generate the mix, for me, it's all in one machine. And, from the very first stuff that I'm talking with Jordan about and the pass of the film we did before the film was even shot, that was the beginnings of the mix for me. Some of the background windscapes and some of the 5.1 spatiality that I had going on 2 months before we shot the film existed up until the final mix. So I'm always chipping away more like a kind of a long-term sculpture at the mix than I am waiting to get to the mix stage to see how to put it together. So I had confidence, and I convinced the studio that it was going to work to you take me on for a longer period of time, and my workflow does facilitate wearing three hats. But yeah, as it turned out, gosh, didn't sleep much in May and June this year.
Wow. If you are a regular listener to Tone Benders, you've heard me mention the O-Mini miniature omnidirectional microphones from Chris Trevino. I've talked about how I love the neutral frequency response and how they are ultrasonic capable, allowing me to really bend and shape and have a lot of fun with my recordings in post-production. Each pair of mics is handmade by Chris Trevino, a practicing field recordist and a really engaged member of the sound community. He uses high-quality components and puts a lot of work into making and testing each mic to ensure they live up to his own high standards. The O-Minis are available in both XLR and 1/8-inch versions to accommodate any kind of recorder you might have. Between their compact form and robust build quality, they work great with a variety of workflows, from everyday carry recording kits to expeditions where every gram counts and you want to keep your pack weight light. Maybe my favorite thing about both versions of the O-Minis is the price. They are extremely affordable, at $130 American for the plug-in power stereo pairs and $150 for XLR pairs. They offer a lot of value. I suggest you give them a try. At this price point, it is a no-brainer. To learn more, head to chrisatrevino.com/store or click on the link in the description of this episode in your podcast app. A quick heads up to listeners in the Toronto area. I've teamed up with the Motion Picture Sound Editors and the Vaughan Film Festival to have a free screening to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the classic sci-fi film Independence Day. After the free screening, I will be doing an in-person interview with 3 key members of the film's sound team. In-house will be Val Koklowski, Andy Malcolm, and Mark Lanza, talking about their work on this groundbreaking film. This will take place in Toronto on July 6th, starting at 6 p.m. at Hot Docs Theatre. Go to the link in the description for this episode and use the code VFF Tonebenders to claim your free seats as well as entrance to the post-screening party where there will be complimentary bites and refreshments. I hope to see you there. Okay, back to Johnnie Byrne. Is building the soundtrack ahead of the movie something you do for every film, or what's your unique process?
So I don't always make a version of the whole film before a film, but it definitely was necessary here because we were finding that sound was so important in telling the story, and it was going to be so informative to know what that sounded like at this point, that it was really useful for Jordan to be able to play to Hoyter, for example, the cinematographer, you know, this is how we're going to hear this shot. And that really informed where to point the camera and how much VFX was needed, you know, if at all. So in this case, yes, it was important to work out certainly all the set piece, you know, the 7 or 8 encounters where we actually have a scene with the alien in it. We did need to work that out beforehand because it was extremely beneficial. Yeah, so my workflow is very much, I work in Nuendo. Each reel of the film is a separate project, you know, and it will have all the hard effects, backgrounds, Foley, dialogue, sound design, and music cues all in that one project. And before the shoot, I'll be loading it up with, these are what I think are backgrounds, lots and lots of muted clips and alternative versions all ready to go. And during the production itself, I'll be going to the film set and recording as many bits of Foley and as many, you know, alternative backgrounds and alternative dialogue takes that I can. And then I always want to give the picture editor a library, you know, at least sort of 20 gigabytes of sound that will be apposite for the material that we're working on. And you know, to avoid that thing of having the picture editor using his own stuff that, you know, that may not be even licensable or whatever, but certainly isn't what you've been developing. And then very much help the picture editor get the tracks in the Avid or whatever they're working in, so that at any point in time that they have a kind of fully playable temp mix that will work, because you've been furnishing them with all fully working sound design ideas and helping them clean up all the dialogue. So then that means that I will have been working in the background within my projects. And when it gets sort of near cut lock, as if that happens these days, I have one reel per project, like I say, and I'll have one assistant who basically concentrates on each reel. I have a team of 4 in London with Simon Carroll, who's the first assistant sound supervisor. And his team basically would help me manage all the needs, whatever it is, in terms of reconforming a reel, changing the backgrounds, working on the sound design. So I would be in America on the mix stage writing a bunch of detailed notes as I play the reel through to the director and whoever else wants to hear it. And those notes go in, and then as it turned out, because of the time zone, it worked very well because, you know, we would sleep and we'd wake up the next morning and the overnight pixies would have changed the sound design or changed the backgrounds or whatever. So we had a pretty good workflow going where Jordan could come in on a daily basis and review all the reels, and the next day we'd have a whole bunch of fresh work done, basically, that would you know, progress the film. In terms of workflow, how's that different? Yeah, I think the main thing is just that right from the beginning of the process, we're starting to create what will be the final mix. You know, there isn't a kind of wait to get to the mix stage thing. It's every decision that we're making is something that if it's good, will go the distance, basically.
You knew off the top that this was going to be getting an IMAX release and be an Atmos, I assume. I find that Atmos sometimes is not as cracked up as other people think it is. I'm not the hugest fan of Atmos, but sometimes a film comes along that is almost built for it. And there are a couple scenes in this film that the ceiling speakers can be really used for something special. Do you want to talk about that maybe in terms of specifically the house scene where it's over top of the house and we hear the people screaming inside?
I know. I mean, if ever there was a film made for Atmos, this is it, right? You've got a monster flying around above you, and wow, I mean, what a treat. Yeah, so reel 5, about halfway through, we go into the house and we're there with Kiki Palmer and Emerald, her character, and Angel, and we hear a scream off in the distance. Kiki turns around and she looks to the window behind her, and you hear a splash of water that comes over the house. And then basically we follow her eye line and she's looking at the roof. But what's happening is there's a wall of water traveling across the roof above us. And then it comes off the side of the house and splashes onto the ground next to them and kind of moves away. It was just an amazing thing to work in Atmos with that, because, you know, you've got full bandwidth sound and it's above you. So you can do the whole rumble thing and pinpoint accuracy with objects. And we had a lot of fun recording various big hoses going on car roofs and the roofs of my shed at home and various things like that. And, you know, banging pieces of wood to kind of mock up the imaginary kind of hip of the roof as the water travels along. And then, and panning that in the 3D space of Atmos was a real treat, actually, because so often you're working in Atmos and you're like, well, I could put it in the ceiling. How about we have a helicopter? That's good. Every film needs a helicopter. But there isn't actually that much. And particularly because even if there is a film with something happening above you, it tends to be that the point of view of the camera doesn't actually support, you know, the use of the ceiling speakers, so it becomes a gimmick. Whereas in this film, there's a lot of times, and it was something that, you know, Jordan and I discussed beforehand, where he could actually keep the camera level and not look up, and then we would have the sound above us, and that would be all the information we needed. And Jordan was, you know, really keen on that kind of thing, because, as is pretty evident, you know, he would much rather hear something and have people's imagination put some horrible thought in there, rather than, you know, necessarily point the camera at it and make it more obvious.
So pivoting a little bit, there were a lot of moments in this film where I couldn't quite tell if certain elements were sound design or music, or perhaps the composer was acting like a sound designer. I'm curious what your collaboration process was like in that regard.
Yeah, Michael came down to the mix stage. It was brilliant, because to come down and go, wow, actually, I get it now. You know, even a composer may not actually hear the mix until the film's sort of, you know, out. But because we were sculpting the mix from an early point, and because we were on the mix stage at uni for 3.5 months, during the process of actually writing many of the cues, Michael Abels came to the mix stage and he was like, oh gosh, I get it. This is a really immersive, you know, wow. And so we discussed it might be useful for him to create some tones and some of the more percussive moments, the staccato strings that happen when all the junk gets dumped on the house and various things like that. And yeah, we had discussions about how he could create sounds that were more sound design led. And then equally, pretty much everything I do whenever I'm laying in any atmosphere is to think about the musicality of it and whether or not it would suit the incoming or outgoing cue to have it sort of foreshadowed or you know, held onto. And it's usually like injecting musical frequency into a background sound by using sharp EQ spikes, that kind of thing. But also everything, you know, I'll be putting in my team and I will be thinking about it from a rhythmic tempo point of view, and from, you know, how it shapes the melody of the thing. I mean, the whole thing of a picture edit has a rhythm, doesn't it? So you're always trying to work with that. I'm definitely a frustrated musician.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if it's useful as a question, but I noticed a few moments where I heard melodies and some of the sound effects, and I could feel the rhythm of it. It was really, really well done. I don't think your average listener would notice it. They'd just be immersed, but I caught it a few times, and I was like, hey, he had a melody to those cable pops or whatever. It was great.
Yeah, I work with Yorgos Lanthimos a lot, and when I do things like that on his films, he's like, really? Do we have to do that? And I'm like, yeah, it's fun. Come on.
It's cool.
So when we locked down the interview time, I sent out on Twitter to our listeners asking if they had any questions for you. And we got some really good ones, and some of them are the same as questions we've already asked, because obviously we had the same ideas. One was about the dialogue. So Dave Shumway asked, he'd be curious to hear you talk about the work involved to make the dialogue gloriously crystal clear. I never missed a word, and yet it sounded 100% properly presented in the world alongside the ambiences and the design effect. How much of this film was ADR? How'd you get such clear dialogue in this?
I love that question, Dave. Yeah, because so I watch films a lot, who doesn't? And so often dialogue is treated as voiceover, you know. Someone who's casually talking tenderly to their son reading a story will be like, and then, you know, when we were, and it'll be rich and bassy, and you think, it's not really real, is it? And so when, particularly with a film like Note, where you're in a really immersive soundscape, it would seem counterintuitive to then plop a full force voiceovery sound in there. So a lot of it was ADR because it was an incredibly noisy film set. All the movement of dust to create the presence of the monster was made by a helicopter, and that created a lot of noise. All those big flappy sky dancer things were permanently on and make an absolute racket and were everywhere across the whole field of play. And the valley itself was incredibly windy because the heat generated, it was like a 40 degree, 110 Fahrenheit heat most days during the shoot, and that just creates such an enormous volume of air movement. And combined with the fact that Jordan does love to fine-tune script and narrative through ADR. So a lot of it was, but we would always, microphone match, and I'm quite keen on not having anyone too close mic'd for ADR because I want it to keep sounding natural. So you've got ADR, hopefully not too overly recorded. And then when I mix it, I definitely want to make sure that things are correct for the perspective of the shot. And it is a bit of an illusion because, there are picture edits where you'll come closer and you don't want to jump in or make it jarring because you don't want to stop following the narrative. But you do want it to sound, natural for the environment.
And the loop group of people screaming inside the monster. We got a question about that from Blaine Kramer.
Thank you, Gianna Carlton-Timms, the ADR supervisor and dialogue editor. And she spent a lot of time working with Loop Group to get those fantastic recordings. So originally the monster was going to be winds, and then we started realizing how interesting screams were. And then we started realizing, loving that fine line between hearing a roller coaster in the distance and how people sound like they're enjoying themselves. And then suddenly it can become awful when you realize that you're hearing screams of pain, because if there's one thing worse than hearing an awful sound in a horror movie, it's an awful sound in combination with a penny drop that something bad has happened. So, sort of visceral and psychological element to it. So Gianna said about getting 10 of Los Angeles' finest loop groupers, and she had a great time, with them all like, right, now pretend you're in a roller coaster. Woo! And then she'd drop her hand and they'd all go, ah! And that's the sound you're hearing when we are inside Jean Jacket at that point in the film. Yeah, it's deadly horrible. And Jordan was so keen on, in that scene, believing that we weren't just with the people who we were tight in on camera, but there were many other people in other parts of the digestive tract, kind of 10 feet away, 100 feet away and all that stuff. So that really helped with that. But yeah, it's horrible, isn't it? Because you just imagine that could be you.
And what about the rest of the sound effects for the interior of the beast?
So the interior of the beast. So that, where's my pop shield? That this isn't the pop shield, but it's basically, it's so I do all my recording
for those
with
listening and not seeing. Johnny just put a foam pop shield on top of the mic and then was rubbing his fingers across it. And I guess that's how you made some of those sounds. That's amazing.
That is. So this is a Neumann U87, but the thing I do all my sound effects recording with is a Sanken CS5, which is a stereo shotgun mic, because I always think you want to be pointing at something, even if you're recording atmospheres or backgrounds. But it had a really long pop shield on it. And all of the conversations that I had with Jordan about the thing early on for the first 3 months were over Zoom, because he was in Los Angeles and I was in the UK. So a lot of the sounds of the film were actually generated by me on a microphone, because that was the easiest way of demonstrating to him during a conversation over Zoom. Because I just know from years of being a studio assistant, when I was younger, I worked for this one engineer who would always tell me off for not muting the microphone before I went and put the pop shield on or adjusted it, because the clients would go deaf because it was such an annoying loud noise. And so finally it became useful.
That's perfect. I was thinking it was a rubber stretching, but now I'm really happy to know that it's the foam on a mic.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I was wondering if we could talk about the idea at the end when Jean Jacket becomes huge. His voice changes drastically. It becomes, it's not this, but this is the closest thing I can previously in my life relate it to. Almost like a foghorn. It's screaming. Can you talk about how you created that?
Yeah, totally. Jean Jacket, is a flying beast, and we wanted to create something that was a weird, interesting sound. And we looked at the world of birds, because the point of that end scene is Jean Jacket having been ignored by OJ because he won't look at it. And the only way that Jean Jacket can get to eat people is if they look at it. So Jean Jacket in that scene is very much showing off. And it was sort of felt like almost like a mating dance of a bird. So we looked at all sorts of different animals, and that sound that you're hearing there is a peacock, slowed down 5 octaves. Slowed down with an awful lot of LFE added. It goes, and yeah, when I put that on and played it to Jordan on the mix stage, at like 85 decibels, it was just an enormous thumbs up. I mean, it works, doesn't it?
It totally works. Another sound that the creature makes is almost, again, I'm relating to real world things, and this is not a real world thing, but almost like someone smacking a mic with a bunch of reverb on it. Like it's almost like it's a glugging or something like that. What was the thought process behind that one?
That sound is the kind of sonar location that Jean Jacket uses to scout out the prey. Again, that's just that is my voice. That's me with a microphone in my mouth, kind of going. It's a sort of glottal stop thing. It's part that and part. That stuff and not actually tapping microphone, but
wow, that was an awesome demonstration. That was fantastic. Throughout this interview, you've mentioned about how Jordan Peele sat with you and listened to endless amount of wins, and he worked with you to build this film before it was shot. Obviously, he must take sound very seriously. Can you just talk about what it's like working with Jordan Peele?
Jordan Peele is someone who really understands sound. I worked with Madonna for a couple of weeks, and she really scared the hell out of me by how much she understood frequency and pitch and everything. And Jordan Peele was probably more intense than that. He really understands music, and he can describe sounds and their use in all sorts of films, over time. So, and clearly he understands sound because he uses it as a writing tool very much, way in advance of most other directors, I would say. Yeah, he's also incredibly generous because he will suggest what he wants to achieve and let you go and work it out rather than, sort of telling you what to do kind of thing, which is obviously, as we all know, a more enjoyable way to work. So what's he like to work with? I mean, he's brilliant. He's, he loves sound and he uses it narratively. That's an absolute dream for someone like me, definitely.
So when you say that he suggests something, you mean he suggests like the emotions that he wants invoked, or what? Give me an example of one of his suggestions, maybe.
When I play Jordan a reel, he will usually have like 5 or 6 notes, and it will never be a specific, I don't like this one thing or those little details. It will be something to do with the feeling he wasn't getting that he wanted. Or it will be expressing to me as a filmmaker what he wants that scene to do that it wasn't achieving. So he won't buy a dog and bark himself. He'll encourage the dog to bark. So he would very much explain to me, for example, that somehow didn't make me feel scared enough. There must be something we can do to bring this scene to more of a crescendo. But it would never be kind of, hey, Johnny, can you, and then, a very technical explanation. However, when you discuss it with him, he can talk in incredible detail. So he's very generous and polite because because if he wanted to say, it's the same thing, like a director should never say to an actor, do it like this, and then actually read the line in the way they want to do it, because that doesn't really actually help them. So yeah, he could if he wanted to, but he very much relies on helping you find the goal, basically.
And how did you two come to be working together in the beginning?
Jordan called up, or one of his team called up and said, would you like to have a conversation with Jordan Peele? And I was like, hell yeah. And then, so the next day we were talking, and the first 20 minutes was about films that we'd worked on. And he said, look, I called you up because I saw a film that you did a few years ago called Under the Skin. And, I just absolutely loved the way sound worked on it. And that was brilliant because instantly then I knew what kind of film he was going to be after. And then he sent me the script and I read it and I completely understood that this was going to be a film where we were going to use sound to tell story. And so the first conversation with Jordan was a real dream because it was like-minded love of film sound, basically.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on the film, because it's definitely a film where sound takes a major role and people walk out talking about the sound. Yeah, and I don't mean sound people. Lay people are walking out talking about it. So congratulations. Thanks for talking to us today, and hopefully we can have you on soon. It was great talking to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Mark. Great talking to you guys.
Sound Ideas works with partners across the creative industries to distribute professional sound libraries, and they're always looking to grow their collection. If you've created your own sound effects library or are currently developing one, Sound Ideas is interested in acquiring high-quality collections from creators, whether it's a focus collection or a wide-ranging release. They offer a trusted platform with global distribution, professional licensing, metadata support, and a team that understands the craft. If you have a sound effects library and are interested in selling it, Sound Ideas would like to hear from you. To get more information, please reach out via email to support@sound-ideas.com. Tonebenders is produced by me, Timothy Muirhead. Theme music is by Jim Guthrie. You can reach me via email through info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow Tonebenders on Instagram to stay on top of new episodes. If you like the show, you can help us out by spreading the word to your friends and colleagues, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click support.